Good morning, Annapolis, Maryland, and all the other nice people out there here at the end of June. We're going to start a new series about the early Maryland history and how it relates to the Jews, how it related to Jews, and how it still continues to relate to the Jews, because the Jews somehow get involved in everything. So the first place we want to go is something we're going to call provincial Maryland, and that's going to be 1634 through 1776. We're going to go back to those interesting times over there. Now, in front of me, I have this beautiful pamphlet, courtesy of Tourism and Chamber of Commerce of the state of Maryland, and on it has a model of the Ark and the Dove and an early tobacco planter, and on the other side it has a nice map of where they landed back in the day when they started Maryland, and I'll leave that out for whoever wants to take a look at, and has all kinds of nice things about Maryland and Baltimore and Annapolis and the Severn River and all the above. And they really did a great job on the forest over there. Beautiful. So now, there's in early Maryland, there's provincial Maryland and there's royal Maryland. So in the beginning, with the Calverts, with George Calvert, Baron of Baltimore, we're going to have England giving a charter to somebody to run the place. Later on, colonists are going to get frustrated and they're going to say, we're not real happy with the Calverts. Can we please switch? We would like the government more involved. So there's a period called the royal period. And that, of course, right there, that is a whole Jewish topic, which isn't for today, of in general, what is better for mankind? More legislation or less legislation? Because when you learn Torah, there are some Gemaras where it looks like the rabbis would like to legislate and legislate and legislate some more. Then there's some other parts of the Talmud where the rabbis will come out and say, stop it, you're troubling the people. Leave the people on their own. They may actually get it right. You do have Gemaras going both ways. For instance, and I don't want to go into too much because I want to stay with Maryland, but if you ever study the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat about Muksa, there was a point where we were so legislated, almost everything in your path was muksa. Wasn't a whole lot you could move around. And then they took it back and made some adjustments. So the idea of more government, less government, you do see plenty of that in the Torah all over the Talmud. So it's not exactly the same thing, but we're going to start out with the provincial, which the King of England is involved, but not so on top of things. Now, the first thing we have to realize is that throughout the colonial period, even though the Maryland and the rest of the colonies were separated from the mother country by the Great Pond, alias the Atlantic Ocean, what happened over there had a shockwave over here. Any single movement in England, whether it was they like the king, they don't like the king, they like the church, they don't like the church, this prince, this princess, capitalism, without fail, the history books show us that anything that happened over there in England affected over here, and it can have violent repercussions, which also has to do with who's going to be capital. Annapolis is St. Mary's. So it's just absolutely amazing. It was far away. There were no cell phones, but people found out what was doing over there. Now, in the early days, though, and this is very, very important for we as Jews, there's going to be a big overall question. In halakha, where did the Jews fit in? How alleged were we supposed to be to the mother country, as Rabbi Hirsch spoke to us about joining and respecting the country to take Shu in? And with the revolution, where did Jews fit in? Historically, we know that there were plenty of Jewish Tory loyalists A lot of Jews were against the revolution. It wasn't so simple. And there were halachic issues. When we get closer to the revolution, we can discuss what great people from the time said, but it wasn't simple. In the same family, you could have brothers and sisters split if they should be on the British side or not. But in the early days, everyone is alleged to the mother country, and people in England used to put the colonial people on the back burner, and we were referred to as the overseas plantation. English is the main show, but the colonies there, that's something we have over there. They're the overseas plantation. We'll see what happens to them, but we're affected by the mother country, okay? Now, of course, as they say in Hebrew, a musar haskell, a good lesson for us to take is Jew. Now, I'll have to say lahavdil to separate between one and the other, but there was a concept that in the colony you needed to care what's going on in England. Now, in this fine book available in every library, Maryland, the History by Richard Walsh, he goes through in great detail showing you every single change in England in the 1600s directly affected over here people's opinion and their actions. It's a great book originally in your local library, and I know you have good ones at Annapolis. I've been there. You couldn't take this book home because it was referenced in library only. But the past few years, they let you take it home. I guess so many people wanted to look at it. So it's there. But for us, of course, our attitude would need to be for Israel. Israel's our mother country, and a person needs to be interested in what's going on over there. That's supposed to affect us here in addition to our other mother country. I worked with a nice fellow named Rabbi Howard Bald. And he's a principal up in New Jersey now. And Rabbi Howard Bald said a beautiful, beautiful thing. He said he was raised by his parents that when his father sat with the newspaper, he would say, what happened in Israel? And he would say it in front of his children because he wanted to inculcate into his kids, you're looking at the news, ask yourself, what happened in Israel? I need to know, I need to care. It's just a beautiful way to raise your kids.
Just a question on that, because I understand that, and the way I was raised, I couldn't agree more. I mean, that was the way I was raised as well, was, Israel was always the first in our mind. Of course, I was born in 1962. Didn't Rav Hirsch write that before Medinat Yisrael? So, I mean, isn't things...
Which thing?
When he wrote about the way you behave within our adopted country. When we're in Galus, I mean, if Israel doesn't exist, right? There is no Israel at the time. I mean, things are a little different then, right? I mean, your focus needs to be more on the country that you're living in, or being a Zionist and trying to make Israel happen, right? I mean, that should...
Rabbi Hirsch writes about that. The best place to look is in the modern version of the 19 letters, edited with notes on each chapter of Rabbi Joseph Elias Zatzal. He asked this question.
Because, I mean, Rav Hirsch wrote it before.
He asked that question. Okay. And he adds to the question, Rabbi Hirsch advocated in his time caring a lot about the wealth of Germany and his big hopes for Germany, and then a few years later Germany turned on us. So they add to that question, would he have written all that support and love your country? Because at that moment when he wrote it, Germany was nice to us, but a few years later there was all kinds of trouble. So Rabbi Elias asked that question also. And he has a big essay on it, but Rabbi Elias says you have to compare what he says there to every place else to come up with a formula.
South Africa is interesting and kind of a unique situation because they were very, very welcoming to Jews in South Africa. And, they accepted them, made them at home, et cetera, but clearly the laws of the country were, mostly in direct opposition to halakha in a lot of ways. So it was kind of a bit of a balancing act as to how far you go to supporting the country that you live in, and I mean, because as I said, they were, as my parents always said, when you're in Galus, they always told me, if a country welcomes you and they're making you feel welcome in that place, and you're living there, you should support that country. I mean, they're welcoming you, but it's a balancing act in South Africa when they're doing things that are clearly a violation of Jewish law.
So the first Lubavitcher Rebbe asked that question with a different slight. Then I'm going to go back to George over here.
It's not that it affects the Jews what they did wrong, but it's against what we believe in. Right?
So Lubavitcher Rebbe he asked a question a different line. Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Balatanya asks, what do you do if the nation that your host nation is clearly anti-Semitic and makes Jew taxes just for Jews to pay? Then what do you do? So Lubavitcher Rebbe discusses that.
They're not anti-Semitic. They actually welcome you, but they do other things which are against what we believe in as Jews. You see, that was the situation in South Africa. We were very welcome as people. In fact, I mean, Jews were almost revered in South Africa, so there was something about it. But you couldn't, as a Jew, look at the general body of law in South Africa and say this is an acceptable way of running of treating people. It's just not. I mean, it's not.
Right. So some of that's going to come up over here. So but that would be a big study in Dina and Malchus Dina. There's two things. One thing, you have to study Dina and Malchus Dina really well, and you have to see exactly what the Lubavitcher Rebbe says. But some of that's going to come up here. It will.
I mean, I'm sorry to take the time, but it's interesting because the only liberal member of Parliament in South Africa was a Jewish woman named Helen Sussman, who was from the same area I was. Highly respected politician. She could get away with saying unbelievable things that no one else could have gotten away with because of the respect that people had for her. It was a big debate in South Africa whether she should even participate in the government because of the way the government is as a Jew. It was very interesting. I'm just saying there was a debate whether that was the right thing to do, was to participate or not, because she was the lone voice of sort of right.
Yeah, but it's going to pop up in Maryland history also. It will pop up. So stay tuned. It will come. It will come up. So one thing we have to recognize that the culverts are going to do a lot for Maryland, but they're not perfect. There's going to be a lot of up and down, but let's see what they did over here, going all the way back in the beginning. In the beginning, you don't have a lot of Jews here, but let's see what happens. So the man that we want from the Calvert family, we want to start with George Calvert, who is, we're going to call him the Baron, the Lord of Baltimore, from 1580 to 1632. And I just want to mention that, the name Baltimore really comes from Ireland. That's where it came from. It didn't come from here. We borrowed it from over there. Now, George Calvert, I don't know if you want to call him the father of Maryland, but the George Calvert, the first Baron Lord of Baltimore, he never saw Maryland. Never saw it. He's going to die shortly before receiving the charter from the king. The charter for the Calverts to start Maryland, at least the way they wanted to, is going to be April 15th, 1632. But he won't see the charter, but he's going to dream about it. It's a little bit reminiscent of all the people who worked so hard to bring about the state of Israel and didn't let to see it. Some people who worked really, really hard. Not exactly the same thing, but it just brings it to mind. Now, Calvert was an interesting person because he converts to become Roman Catholic. And therein we have some of the beginning of all the strife in the state of Maryland between the Catholics and the Protestants, and it's going to be big, and it's going to get violent.
And Lord Baltimore didn't help it either.
But with all due respect to George Calvert, he's not exactly the first guy here. I'm not going to get into the whole Indian thing. There is another fellow named Mr. Claiborne. And William Claiborne, he's a macher, he's a somebody in Virginia, and he has something going on in Kent Island, which sitting in this building is not even a half hour from here. So William Claiborne, he is the joker in the deck, if you want to call him that, and Calvert's going to have to deal with that. But as far as if you want to be first, okay, fine. You have the Indians here first. Maryland, compared to a lot of other states, we do fairly well. Not perfect, but compared to other states, culverts do pretty well with them. But Claiborne, he had something going on first, and he is not happy about culvert coming in over here. It's sort of, I was here first and I don't like your ideas, especially since you converted to become Roman Catholic. So he never saw Maryland. Now, he's an educated guy. He's got an Oxford education, this George Calvert. He's from Yorkshire County, and he became a knight in 1617. Now, when he converted to Roman Catholicism, he had to resign his position of Secretary of State over there in England. But he wanted to do that. In 1625, he declares himself a Roman Catholic, and he's going to have all kinds of problems in both England and America because of that. But there he is. He's the first Baron of Baltimore. Now, historians discuss a little bit what exactly was his intention of chartering to make a colony over here. Now it's interesting, some books say, oh yes, he was thinking religious freedom, that was at the top of his mind. Maryland is going to be a haven of religious freedom. That's what some books say. Some other books say, well, that was probably it, but they said, let's be real. He had investments with the East India Company. He had investments with the Virginia Company. You know, he probably was thinking religious freedom, but he was thinking money also, and that'll be okay. Now, I don't want to open a Pandora's box. It's a shul. Instead of Pandora, we'll call it a Hadassah's box of getting that for Jews. Our hero is Thomas Kennedy from Hagerstown. He's the one with his buddies that will stand up for the Jews, but that's later. He's the big Jewish hero. We'll save him for later. We really liked him. He really liked us. He wrote a poem about us. And the funniest thing is a lot of historians say this fellow, Thomas Kennedy, really stood up big time for the Jews, but a lot of people think he never met one of us. So that makes, he stood up for other minorities also, but that's a big topic. We'll have to get to him. And everybody says he's not related to the Kennedys you're used to hearing about. But from Hagerstown, where Hagerstown, there has been a Jewish community for a long time. I think they may have even had a mikvah, and there's still a Jewish community there. Nice park and museum.
My grandma said her mother went into the river and went down to the river.
In Hagerstown?
Yeah.
Oh, but not this river, the Hagerstown River. Oh my.
She did. I mean, they had a religious mother.
That's
They
like
lived
the
in
Shenandoah or
Hagerstown.
something like that, right?
But I don't think the show was reformed. Now I think it's reformed, but when they were there, probably was Orthodox when she was there many years ago. My mother, great-grandmother, I never knew.
All right, so we have Bullman roots everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, whatever he was thinking, so first though, Maryland was not his first choice. So George Calvert, he did come here, although not to Maryland, so he was looking up north, and in 1620, he wants to found a colony in Newfoundland. Tried that out, and he gave it a very Maryland name. He called his colony in Newfoundland Avalon. So that's a name that shows up in not so old Baltimore history. In Baltimore, at the corner of Cold Spring and Park Heights, in the middle of the old Jewish neighborhood, and Rabbi Shapiro's shul, Agudas Acham Anshe Svard with the famous big steps, was the Baltimore Avalon Theater. And you know, they had that movie about Baltimore and Maryland with the Avalon, so it's just neat that he did that. But he gave up on that one because he said it was just too cold. That's all. And even though London is not famous, wherever in England isn't famous for its good weather, but he decided it was too cold over there. I want to find something better.
Our land is too cold. I can assure you of that.
So you agree with Lord Calvert over there. All right. So he's looking around for something profitable. So he asked the king respectfully, I would like a charter somewhere in His Majesty's Dominion of Virginia. Now, if you speak to a kid nowadays and you say, Calvert wanted a colony in His Majesty's Dominion of Virginia, kids would say, I know where that is. Dominion of Virginia, I know where that is. You go south on 95 and there's an amusement park, King's Dominion. Oh, that must be Calvert. I mean, I guess they got the name Dominion, King's Dominion from all this, but that's what they would say. But he respectfully answered that, and he decided, well, I'm going to go sail the bay, and I'm not going to quite make it to Maryland, but he's going to sail down there to Maryland. I mean, down to the bay, and it's always so nice. All the accounts you read of explorers coming to our bay, they're always gorgeous. They're always talking about how wonderful the bay is and the surrounding area and how wide open and how wonderful it is. Makes you want to call your rabbi and say, Rabbi, are you sure there's no bracha, I say, on the bay?
The bay used to be like that.
Just for the record, really when my family was in Massachusetts Bay, so we took a good look at the map, and he said, Rabbi, the Massachusetts Bay is different than the Chesapeake Bay, because the Chesapeake Bay is more inland. Massachusetts Bay in Boston Harbor is wide open, and it very much opens up to the ocean. And our rabbi told us to make the blessing on the ocean. We didn't have to go all the way out to the ocean. He says, you go a little bit out of the harbor in the Boston Bay over there. He goes, you can make the bracha already. But Chesapeake Bay is constructed different. That's the way Hashem wanted it over there. Cape Charles and all that thing over there. But anyway, so he has some plans. He would like Maryland, and he initially was going to call it Terra Maria, but it's got that M-A-R in over there. And
that means Maryland.
The hope that a lot of books write about, now whether this was in his mind, 50%, 40%, when it's going to come to his son, Cecil, whatever you want to say, Cecil, Cecilius Calvert, the next Lord of Baltimore, who's going to be the grantee. Somebody in there definitely was thinking a lot about religious freedom, and the way they quote it is, they want Maryland to be a place where all denominations, and I gotta be honest, all denominations of Christianity are free to worship with no special privileges granted to the Anglican British Church more than anybody else. You should come, you're persecuted, come here. Now the sad thing is this. When we Jews pray, we pray for our leaders to do things correctly. And we have a blessing we say 3 times a day, Melech, Ohev, Tzedakah, Umishpat, Hashem. You are the King of justice and righteousness, so let that carry over to your leaders. So unfortunately, we're going to have some Calverts, and they're saying, oh, Maryland is going to be for religious freedom, and in 1649, the Maryland Assembly is going to make the Toleration Act, and they're going to say, oh yes, let everybody do what they want, and they're going to put in it a really neat clause. Now, I had a really good time. The last time I talked about this, there were 2 British citizens in the group, and they brought it up to modern terms. So they're going to make this very, very serious act of toleration in 1649, and this is what it's going to say. If you call anybody a name or term in a reproachful manner relating to matters of religion, if you do that, you must forfeit and lose the sum of 10 shillings sterling. Now this is a little bit funny, because in all the history books it says in 1649 your average Marylander didn't have a farthing in their pocket, because the dollar was the tobacco leaf. Not till much, much later are people going to be using money big time. Only the super rich people had a few shillings in their pocket. So it's a little ironic that the fine for calling someone a religious name is 10 shillings sterling. Very few people in Maryland were walking around with 10 shillings sterling. But so, I had a good time asking these people from Great Britain, do they still have shillings now? To which they said, not right now. They said they changed it a few years ago.
They're changing back. You know, they just voted to take themselves out of the EU.
Well, you better. So I better tell these ladies.
But 10 shillings is like a half a pound of silver. It's a lot of silver.
Well, that was the fine, but the sad thing is the Calverts are going to make that rule, and they're going to break their own rule. Later on, they're going to break their rule left and right, and that's going to tick off the people of Maryland, and that's where they're going to want to switch from provincial rule to royal rule for a while, because they made this rule, and it sounds all wonderful. I mean, when we get to it, I'll read you the exact wording. It's absolutely glorious, but they made this rule. It's such a landmark thing, and the leaders themselves went back on it. So that's a very important thing that we Jews daven to make sure that our leaders, they're going to practice what they preach and not go back on it, or you can't be the leader. I just was studying with my very, very young group, King Solomon's address when they opened up the temple, the Bet HaMikdash. And he keeps saying again and again, thank you Hashem for letting me, David's son, build the Beit HaMikdash. But he says, God, you're going to keep your promise if we do what you told us to do. If we follow the Torah. He just keeps stressing, yeah, David was the king, I'm his son, my son should be the next king. It should be a Davidic line, and you promised me we'd be in charge. But he keeps saying, gotta follow the rules, gotta follow the rules. So, you know, it's always sad when a leader makes a big deal about a rule and they break it. Now, our leaders aren't perfect, close to perfect, but we daven all the time that our leaders should do the right thing and shouldn't be swayed. But okay, this is what it's supposed to be. Well, he doesn't live long enough to it, but the king is going to go through it, and the king is going to let him have Maryland, and they have all kinds of high hopes for Maryland. So let me move over to Cecil Calvert, 1608 to 1675. Now, one thing I got to say about Cecil Calvert is he reminds you a little bit about family relationships, and I hope I'm not hitting a note on anybody. Now, me, it definitely won't hit a note because I am the oldest in my family. But if you ever have an older brother or sister that likes to pull rank on you, like you have an older sister, are you the oldest?
Well, my sister's actually younger than I am.
You're older than Margot. Oh.
Good to know.
I'm the oldest.
What's up?
Actually, I'm the oldest.
All right, I stand corrected. All right, I stand corrected. Where do you fit in?
I have an older sister.
Oh, okay. All right, we should live and be well. But if you ever had an older sister or brother that likes to push you around a little bit,
That would be her.
So Cecil Calvert is going to make his brother Leonard Calvert to be the governor. See, Cecil Calvert isn't going to be here very much. Leonard Calvert's going to be running the show. He's going to come with our Mayflower, the Ark and the Dove, and you can see the models if you go down to southern Maryland.
Older, so he inherited the lordship, right?
But Cecil likes to remind Leonard, remember, I'm the boss, I'm your older brother, and do a good job, but don't forget me. You know, anything you do, I can veto, and you have to answer to me over there. So just don't forget that. Of course, that's a lesson of a way not to be. But anyway, so Cecil takes over. He's the grantee, and he inherits the Maryland Charter, and they describe it as a princely domain, and he has a long list of powers. And the Maryland Charter has 23 articles of all the powers he has, and he's got to be very, very careful that it doesn't go to his head. He's got to watch out for this. And of course, we as Jews, so we think a lot about that. We say, well, our leader's a Jewish king, has powers, but he also has restraints. Everybody knows there's a special rule on how many wives a Jewish king could have, and rules about how many horses and where to go for the horses. I mean, Jewish kings have an awful lot of power, but they do have some restrictions, and we know a Jewish king must walk around accompanied with that mini Sefer Torah, right? And there are plenty that say that he may have even worn it as a necklace, but he's got to remember, well, you're the boss, but you're not the boss. You have to answer to a higher authority over there. So a lot of power can be dangerous. And of course, if you go through the Gemara in Brachot, it'll definitely show sometimes a king can do whatever he wants, and sometimes he's got checks and balances. He's got to answer to a Navi or two, a prophet or two. He's got to answer to the Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Brachos has a... Right. We may have to ask the Choshen too. The Gemara in Brachos has the whole procedure. So he's got a lot of power, but there are some checks and balances over there. I don't exactly want to compare Cecil Calvert exactly to King David and King Solomon, but there is some commonality. Now, there's a problem. There is a problem. So Cecil Calvert is all excited, and I will show you a great picture. Now, I don't know what these guys really looked like, but if you Google any of their names, whether it's George Calvert, Leonard Calvert, Benedict Calvert, whoever you want, in the old paintings, they all look terrific. I don't know if that's what they really look like, but in the paintings, they look pretty good, and they all got great hair and great robes. So this is what Cecil Calvert was supposed to have looked like. Cecil, Cecil, Cecilius, whatever you like. He looks pretty good over there, whoever painted him. This is long before airbrushing. But yeah, he looks pretty good.
Looks like he's wearing a tallis.
And George looks pretty good in the pictures also. But they make him look. They look good. They look good. Well, he has a problem. Now, nowadays we have modern cartography, and if you want a map, you want to know a property boundary, we can be very, very efficient. I do part-time work for a real estate attorney, and he can tell you all kinds of stories of disputes between borders and how for years we send airplanes and helicopters all over counties in Maryland to discern exactly what's what. I'm friends with actually a bankruptcy attorney who used to do real estate, David Cohn Esquire, and David Cohn told me when he was starting out in his law practice, he wasn't sure which area law he wanted. So he dabbled in real estate for a while. There was a real estate dispute, some county around here, and his law firm had to hire a helicopter to fly over low and parts of the county to see if there were traces of an ancient cow path. A cow path. They were looking for that because there was a whole dispute about who owned what and who had permission, and they found remnants of the cow path, and they won what they wanted. All right, but that's nowadays, right? Nowadays we can calculate it unbelievably. However,
differential GPS.
Calvert has a problem. He didn't really know exactly where Maryland started and Maryland ended. Later on, another Calvert is going to have a fight with William Penn, exactly where Maryland ends and Pennsylvania begins. And of course, William Penn was a great man. He makes great oatmeal, has a great hat and all that. but that Quaker was a darn good businessman, and one of the Calverts is going to have to go back to Great Britain to settle a case with William Penn. Of course, when he goes, there's going to be a revolt over here when the cat's away. But this is the problem. This is the big one, and Annapolis is very, very close to it. And this was in the Supreme Court for over 150 years, because it said as follows: on the lower border of Maryland, and we got some really cool words here. If you're into cartography, you're going to love this lingo. And this again is from Richard Walsh. Well, in Article III, it traced an outline of Maryland westward from the ocean along the 40th parallel unto the true meridian of the first fountain of the river Potomac. Don't you love that? First fountain of the river Potomac. Potomac. P-A-T-T-O-W-M-A-C-K. I guess it's got an Indian flavor over there. Oh, yeah. Thence, from the Potomac, along the south bank of the river to point where it disembows into the Chesapeake, and then along the parallel that runs through Watkins Point back to the ocean. So the trouble was, it wasn't really clear, because if you go west, the Potomac splits. So the state of Virginia said, no. When the king gave you Maryland and said Potomac is your border, it's that north one over there. Virginia, we own all the land and have complete water rights all the way up to the upper branch of the Potomac. And Maryland said, oh, no, that's not what the king meant. We own everything down to the southern branch of the Potomac. We control the land, we control the water. This case went to court. Like I said, it was in there for 150 years. It reached the Supreme Court, and I don't think it was that long ago that they decided it. And this is bad news, because it's a matter of taxes, fishing rights, water rights, and this is a brutal battle between Maryland and Virginia, and Calvert's going to have a problem with Virginia from the start about this issue with the borders over here. Now, to the credit of the children of Israel, so in Israel, the one that has big time water rights is Shevet Naphtali, the tribe of Naphtali. If you go through the Gemara in the 7th chapter of Baba Kama, according to the letter of the law, the tribe of Naphtali, they own the Kinneret. They have the fishing rights, and the Gemara tells us around the Kinneret is the very best fruit Israel has to offer. So the Gemara teaches us, according to the letter of the law, Shevet Naphtali, they got the fishing rights, they got the boat rights, they got the everything. And the Torah teaches us that Shevet Naphtali sat down with a big board meeting. More than once, there was a big tribal meeting, more than once, where Shevet Naphtali was willing to give in certain things, to give certain limited fishing rights with certain limited fishing gear and fishing boats to let the other Shvatim participate, not to keep the whole economy in Shevet Naphtali's pocket. And it's very, very beautiful Gemaras. It doesn't seem to be that the children of Israel had any fight with Shevet Naphtali, because I believe you find Yeshua and other leaders holding a meeting, and they had concessions, and it's really, really beautiful. If I remember correctly, the Yam Shel Shlomo, the Shlomo Rabbi Shlomo Luria says there was very specific rules. Shevet Naphtali was allowed to use any fishing apparatus they wanted in the Kinneret in Israel. Other tribes, they only could use certain things to limit their fish intake. But if I remember correctly, the only tribe that was allowed to trawl when you drag it along the bottom where you catch a lot of fish. I believe Shevet Naphtali kept that right for themselves. But it's just very, very beautiful how the children of Israel, they really worked on this, because water rights could be a major issue of contention. Dr. Friedman and I studied a Gemara where they were partners that had water rights to a well. A guy came in the wrong day and he took a farming tool and he slammed the other guy in the head and it went to court. People get very tense about water rules. So Maryland and Virginia are going to have a problem, and Calvert's going to have an issue with it for years to come. And eventually it gets settled. I've been told that it's supposed to be completely settled, so the next time you go over the Potomac, I don't know which part you have to, pay a tax to the water, but enjoy your boat wherever you go. All right, so that's what I have of his problem that would last for generations. All right, C. Let me just end with C. The Ark and the Dove, 1633 to 1634. All right, that's our proud Maryland Mayflower boat, the boat that the younger Calvert came here with. That's our Mayflower. You can see replicas in St. Mary's. Very exciting. Now, and of course that went to St. Clement's Island, not too far from what was going to be the capital of Maryland, St. Mary's over there. Now, something that must be noted. So they named the boats the Ark and the Dove. That's obvious. Everybody learned in Hebrew school. Makes you think of Noah's Ark. And the dove was the bird that Noah sent out at the end of the flood to think that was dry, that if things were dry. Throughout colonial history, you have this tightrope. So we run a tightrope. Throughout colonial America, there are all these biblical references. Our boats coming to Maryland, they're the Ark and the Dove. And in many, many places, it talks about the people coming to America viewing themselves as the children of Israel and making all kinds of biblical references. So like sometimes it seems like, oh, these people really like the Bible. They're going to be really nice to the Hebrews, to the children of Israel. But then sometimes it works out that way, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. You have somebody like the father and son team, Reverend Cotton Mather and Reverend Increase Mather. That really was their name. They love Jews. Oh, did they love us with all the biblical references, coming to the promised land of America. They loved us so much that they really, really wanted to convert us. They didn't get physical about it, but they loved us so much, they said, America's the promised land together with Palestine, and we love you, so, we'll help you out, and then you'll convert. And he was a little bit disappointed that he really didn't get too many members.
Some Jews for Jesus people have the same opinion.
Yeah, so it goes back from the start.
They call the leaders rabbis. They're not even rabbis.
Yeah, well, Cotton Mather didn't do that. He just had a really cool wig, but they tried that.
Like some of them now.
So on the one hand,
you would tell the non-Jews, now bless the Jews. You try to bless your Jews by supporting, by helping the Jews out in Ethiopia. But what they're trying to do is make them Christians.
Right, so Cotton Mather and Increase Mather want to do that. In this country, we did have some of that, but it just got back and forth. It's nice to see the biblical references, but the respect for the Jews is going to waver. Now, there's an old history book, Pictorial History of Maryland Jewry, put out by A.D. Glushico, and nice picture of him. There he is, A.D. Glushico. From 1955, he put out this book, and he has a whole article. This is an old book because it has, as we say in Hebrew, haskamas, approbations from everyone's favorite governor, Theodore R. McKeldin, the first man to drive over the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, and from Baltimore's favorite mayor, Nancy Pelosi's daddy, Tommy DeLisandro Jr. So he got a haskama from them. But he has a whole article that is the only place I saw it, that he speaks about a Maryland settler, Matthias de Sousa, and he writes all about how they treated him properly, and that he was in the Provincial Assembly of 1642, and he writes all about how the early Marylanders had a respect for the Bible, and they were nice to this Jewish fellow. He was okay, but then later on, when President Thomas Jefferson appoints one of the Edding brothers to have a position, a leading position in Baltimore, the president said this nice Jewish guy should have a leading position in Baltimore. The Baltimore City Council said, "You're Jewish. You won't say allegiance to the church. You can't have that job." And Edding said, "What do you mean? The President of the United States told me to take this job." They said, "Very nice." Baltimore City Council says no. So it's going to be up and down and bouncing all around. So it's really nice that it's named the Ark and Dove and all that and get some freedom. But when it comes to respect for the Bible and the Jews, you're going to have some of this.
That was later.
Yeah, it's going to take a while. But on the Ark and the Dove, we're not sure exactly how many people were on it. Some people say 128. Some people say more. They stop along the way to pick up a bunch of Roman Catholics. They pick up 2 Jesuit fathers, and all this feeds into people saying it was about religious freedom. And Leonard Calvert is coming with them there, and they stop at St. Clement's Island. If you go there now, and somewhere on here it probably has the phone number. If you go to St. Clement's Island, it's not that far from Annapolis. You can pay a few dollars. They'll take you on a boat. They'll take you out to the island where they landed over there. And they were very excited when they came. They put up a big cross. They had mass. And the history books said the people looked around. What beautiful forest. What an impressive river. Oh, we like this river in Maryland, the river of the Bay, much better than anything that we have back home in England. And they had, the history book said, they had a very, very concentrated, heartfelt mass to thank the Lord that they got here in one piece. And you all know in the 1600s, the ship journey, don't forget about that. There are pages in the Talmud that discuss why we bench Gaimel for a ship's journey. We still do it nowadays, even though it's a heck of a lot safer. But then, the Talmud, based on Psukim from David Amalek, describes a ship's journey that you come off with half your brain scrambled from all the shaking and the seasickness and the food getting rancid and all that kind of business. But they were very, very, very thankful. So you all know there are times that Jews learn from other religions and the times that we don't, but at least we could take a good lesson from them. When they got off that boat, they prayed really, really, really well. So, we Jews, we're usually pretty good at that. Yeah. I'll just end with honor with one of my old rabbis. Rabbi Samuel Vitzik used to be the head chaplain of Sinai Hospital in Levendale in Baltimore, and he had a shul, Beis Medrash of Baltimore. So we asked him once, what was the best prayer you did in your whole life? He said, I was in the Kelm Yeshiva in Poland. I took a walk. I was thinking about some Talmudic studies. I got lost in my thoughts, and I got lost in the forest. Yeshiva boy lost in the Polish forest back in the 20s or the 30s. He said, I never was so scared in my life. Lions and tigers and bears, whatever they had in Poland. I think he was more scared of the peasants. And he said it was pitch black. He says, I davened a Ma'ariv. Before or after, I never prayed a Ma'ariv like that, being stuck alone in the Polish forest. I got out in the morning, but he said, boy, he never prayed like that ever again. So it's just a message. We don't want to wait till something harrowing happens to pray, but it seems to be these fellows, they said some kind of quote-unquote hallel over there. And next time we're going to talk about the positive meaning that Governor Leonard Calvert will have with the Indians, which will talk also about certain halakhic issues people love to fight about. Well, was that a good transaction or not? And the fun question was, did Leonard Calvert cut the deal to buy the bottom of Maryland with the right Indian chief? Because some history books want to say he had the wrong chief. and they were getting ready to leave anyway. So stay tuned for the adventures of the Calverts, the Jews, and anybody else that pops in.
This is Gallic actually wants.
la 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 la